Welcome back everybody to the third video in our series of creating a Wordle companion app. In the first video, we created the UI for the first word, and then in the second video, we went through and we adjusted the server so that we can click on these buttons, which will eventually be labeled with the letters of our guess, so that it matches what Wordle tells us, for yellow being in the wrong spot, green being in the right spot, and blank for that letter not being in the word. So what we're going to do now is we're going to actually functionalize some of this code so that we can repeat it a lot more easily than just copying and pasting. So let's suppose that we just wanted to copy and paste this. We could copy down the observe event for the second letter, and we could find it for L2 and replace it with L3. And then if I save that and reload, we now have this working for the third, but our fourth and our fifth still aren't working. So we would need to copy it down again, change L2 or L3 to L4 and then to L5. And then we would have to do that for every other word that we have, for which it would be 6, right? Because it gives you 6 attempts. So rather than doing that, what we can do is we can just write this into a function where all we do is we pass this ID into that function, and it will run that observe event for that particular letter of that particular word. So to do that, we're going to go to new file, our script, and we're going to save this file. So we're going to save this into a folder that we're going to reference called functions. And this is going to be a function called change letter color. So now we have a change letter color.r file, and we're going to now create the change letter color function, which is going to take 3 arguments, a session input because we have to reference the inputs to our app, and then we also need to pass in an ID, and that ID that we're going to pass in is just going to be this L1 W1 or L2 W2, so on for all of the letters of every word. So we can just copy that from our server file, paste that in, and then it will just be replacing all of these with ID, so that anytime we want to run this, what we can do is we can just call this function rather than having to copy it, paste it, and replace to reference the proper ID. So we can just go here, we can find the quotation mark, L1 underscore W1 quotation mark, and we just want to replace that with ID. And so you see here and here we have it, but now it's replaced with just that ID variable. So now that we've written our function lives outside of our UI and our server, and that's really what Shiny knows to use to create our app. So what we have to do is we have to tell our server or our UI to pull in this other file that we wrote that's in our functions folder. So to do that, we can go into our UI, and right below where we have our packages, we can just source the file. And this was in our functions folder, and it was called change letter color.r. So now that we reference this function that we wrote is now able to be used throughout our app. So we can go into our server file, and we can now use change letter color session input as the first 2 arguments for letter 4 of word 1, and also you can copy this, paste it down for letter 5 of word 1. So now that I save that, if we look again, these weren't working, but all I have to do is reload the app, and now we see that it is working for all of the letters within our first word in the same way that it does for all of the other ones. So perfect. So now we've functionalized this, and we can just delete all of this code that we have existing in our server. And then all we're going to want to do is copy what we have and do that for every other letter. So for letter 1, letter 2, letter 3, letter 4, and letter 5. So we can save this, reload it, and everything is still working as it was before. Right? So now all we did with that was we really cleaned up our server file. So if we wanted to make some change, let's say we wanted to make it go green first instead of yellow, then we could do that, and we would only have to do that once within this change letter color file, rather than doing it every time that we've copied it and pasted it within our server file. So just like we did this for change letter color, we can actually do this for our UI as well. So this is the chunk of code here that creates our UI. This div here creates the word with the text input and the button, and then this fluid row, it controls all of these buttons that are going to serve as kind of the guiding force for telling our app what letters are in the right spot, wrong spot, or not in the word. So we can go again, file, new file, and we're going to create an R script. I'm going to move this over this way, and this time we're going to save this file as our word input UI. So we can save that there, and then we want to create the function word input UI. It's going to be a function that takes two arguments. We want to take an ID argument for the actual word that it is, and then we're going to use the individual number of the word 1, word 2, for example, many times. So we're just going to read in a separate word ID argument as well. So now that we have this, we can go back into our file and we can source functions word input UI.r. So now this function, which is currently empty, is now able to be used throughout our app. So we can copy this code, and we have a couple of things to do before we paste it. So we just need to, because we're creating this ID in a different part of our app that we want to be using throughout the rest of our app, we just actually need to make this NS call. So a lowercase ns and then a capital NS of ID. And then we can do this tag list here, and this is where we're going to paste all of the code that we had before. So just like we did before, we can just replace the hard-coded variable names that we had, such as word1 guess, with the ID. So now we have this input ID of ID, and actually we don't need this NS of NSID because we aren't creating this in a module. So now that we have this, the label, word1, value, and then tag append attributes, that's all fine. So what we're going to want to do is paste 0, go with the word ID. So this button is called go1. So we can reference the value of that button with go1. But as we add a second word, we want to call this button with an ID of go2, then go3, go4. So with that, we can just, whatever word ID we pass in, we'll change the label of this word ID. And we can keep the label of it as lock guess the same. So finally, within the individual buttons, if we click on a letter, we want it to change colors, but we want to make sure that that's responding in the correct word, right? So we have L1W1 for letter 1 of word 1. So what we're passing in is a word ID, so we can replace this here, paste 0 of letter 1, and then word, and then we want to paste in the word ID. And we can copy this, we can paste this in, forgot the last quotation mark, and paste that in for all 5 of the letters of the individual words. And then all we have to do, L2, L3, L4, L5, and now this is going to reference each of the letters that we have within the various words for the word ID that we pass in. So if we run this here, if I do word input ID for the ID of word 2, and the number there is going to be 2, and we reload the app, we don't have the word input ID into it. So word input ID, word input UI.r. Let me do this and then run the app one more time. We still have it. Cannot find function word input ID. Oh, whoops, that's because we did word input ID here. This is word input UI. So then let's run the app again. Perfect. So now we see that we have the second one. And then if I go through and I do word input UI of word 3, and then we reload, now we have the third one. So this is a really quick and easy way for us to add more words. If let's say we didn't want to just stop at 6, we wanted to go to 10 or 30 or 40 or whatever, all we would have to do is pass in the ID that we want to be able to reference that word and the number of that word that we have. But one of the things that we can see on the right is that it's word 1 each time. So we want to go back into here, and our label is what's causing that. And we see that we've still hard-coded our label as word 1. So that's really easy to fix. We just want to paste 0 word, and then we instead want to use the word ID rather than just saying it's word 1. And so since we created this file and it's not actually within our UI and server, you see that we don't have a run app button here. We actually have to close out of our app and then rerun the app entirely so that it registers the change. And so we have that spaced. We can easily just add a space there, do that, go here, run the app again. And so now we've got word 1, word 2, and word 3. So let's just do this for the remaining 3 words that we need. 6, 6, 5, 4, and then 4, 5, and 6. And then we can also erase that. We can delete that, and we can do word input UI for word 1, and that's referenced as word 1. So then if I reload the app, now we have 6 guesses, 6 words that we have there. So one thing we can do to just give a little bit more of a styling component to it is just add a little bit of a break using BR in between each of these words so they're not as close together. So we'll just copy this, paste that down, and we'll just do this in between each of the words. Reload the app. Perfect. So now we've got this a little bit more spaced out, and what we have is the full functionality of our app. So here we only have this for the first set of words. Now we can do word 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then we can go here, find W1, replace with W6, and we can replace all there. Here, find W1, W5, W1 with W4, W3, and W2. So there still is a little bit of manual work, but that's so much quicker than doing it and so much cleaner than doing it completely outside of the app. So now we have created the UI for all 6 of our words, and we've created the server functionality to change the letter color every time we click on it for all 6 of our words as well. So if we reload the app, we can go here, click that, click that. Any of these will now be fully built out to respond to the number of times that we click on it. And all we had to do was just copy down our change letter color function and have that all be created. So now we have this basic framework of the UI with all 6 of the words, and we have the functionality to change the letter color every time, but we don't have any data yet, right? We just have first guess stuck there. So in the next video, we're going to start actually working with the data to allow us to create a functional Wordle companion app. So I'll see you all in the next video.